Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This is episode number 80. I had to double check that because finally, 80 episodes. It seems like we've been chasing this for a while. And we got Scotty at the shop in the race car. And Dussex is joining us today, and we've got another special guest. Joining us today is Amir from RS Future. And Amir, we're going to talk to you. I want to ask you a lot of questions about that car that's sitting right behind you. But maybe before we do that, can you give us just kind of a sense of what RS Future is, what you do at the shop?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a few things at RS Future. I guess the number one thing that we do is we produce carbon fiber aerodynamic components, wing splitters, that kind of thing. That's our biggest thing. We do them for a lot of custom applications, primarily time attack cars is what it seems to be the products end up on, and then a lot of like HPDE cars as well. But since our background is in time attack, that's what a lot of it is. And then we do a lot of builds as well and customer support for track and time attack stuff. Like right now, we have about 5 projects going on. We don't do like a typical shop where we're doing installs. We do almost none of that. It's all larger projects, like A to Z kind of builds. We have an S2000 that we're doing a full like 700 wheel horsepower sequential cage time attack build that'll be in limited class. We have an NSX that we're doing it's like almost going to be a street version of my car in a way that we're building, and a few other kind of similar projects at that scale. And then on a personal level, with I guess you could say still kind of part of RS Future, I do a lot of like coaching, and then I'm currently doing Ferrari Challenge data and video for a team with their IMSA schedule. So about 1 week out of the month I go do that, and then find time for coaching and data stuff for California clients, and then do the track or the RS Future shop stuff in the rest of the time.
Wow. That is a lot. I'm feeling stressed out for you just listening to all of that. I can only imagine being in the middle of it.
It's hectic but worthwhile.
Sure. Well, and playing with race cars, it sounds like every day, it's kind of living the dream, which is awesome.
100%. It's it's been a long time that's kind of built up to this, and it's nice to be able to do it every day.
Absolutely. Well, so I'm curious, carbon fiber and doing car builds, that makes sense, but then doing the data analysis and coaching for driving, that seems like two very different things. With your background, what did you come into first, doing kind of the driving analysis or doing the carbon fiber and that sort of thing?
It started with driving and data and that typical thing, kind of like I feel like a lot of guys that deep dive into this, we found that the easiest way to drive a lot is to start coaching for an organization. There are a couple of organizations that I coached for. I started with the BMW Club, then there's an organization out here that was called Extreme Speed that I did a lot of coaching for. So it started just as instructing, I guess you could say, your typical hop into a car for a day or a session and help someone out in exchange for free track time. I did that for about 10 years, just driving. Yeah, so I've been driving for about 14 years now. I did that for about 10 years. And in wanting to become a better driver and build faster cars, I just started playing with data. AIM Solo was the easiest one to start out with. Started out with that and just looking at speed traces and lateral and longitudinal G, and then expanded into a lot of other stuff and found out that I really liked it. So took a few classes, read every book I could, and then just one thing led to another, and got paired up with a team that I'm working with now. And then just for normal kind of club racing and time attack clients, I try to help as much as I could with that, just to build my own knowledge almost.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then
very cool.
The carbon stuff just happened where I started building my car for street class, and there were a lot of components that I wanted for the car that I couldn't find. So I just kind of taught myself and started making stuff, and from there paired up. There are a lot of people I had asked to kind of get what I had for their car, and my skill level wasn't up to that. So I started working with a couple of guys who are in the aerospace industry to start making some really high-end components, and then that expanded into what is, now my full-time job.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's an interesting learning curve, right? When you're just getting into carbon, like, oh, I'm going to make this. And then you're like, man, that kind of sucks, but it works, right? And it weighs like an eighth of the weight of whatever you're replacing. And
exactly. And it's just basically very fancy arts and crafts,
Sure.
It seems like a very, very complex craft, and it is in its own way. But when you look at kind of how simple composites are, where it's basically a cloth and a form of glue that you put together in something and then pop out apart, it was something that just seemed attainable and achievable to do. And on my own scale, like now my skill set is much greater than what it was before, but very cool and interesting thing that I kind of was like, oh, I think I can do this, and self-taught myself pretty much most of it.
beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Jelly.
Well, I mean, maybe just to that end, so like when you're talking about making carbon fiber parts, I mean, what is kind of the average part that you make, and is there anything that you've taken on that you're just like, I don't know if we can do this, and then it actually worked out, like doors or roofs, or I don't know, how big have you gone?
So we have the capability to do just about anything, and thanks to CAD, it's made it a lot easier than what it used to be for people that were doing it before. And the biggest, I guess, the kind of the easiest, but one of the most challenging things to make is still a wing, because we're always fighting the balance of being as light as possible, fit just about any car, and also be incredibly strong. The lows that these things see, like our wing element weighs under 5 pounds, but can withstand the downforce and the mounting forces at 180 miles per hour, which it's been, basically tested up to. So while it's one of the first things we made, we're constantly trying to improve it, trying different carbon, different layups, different resins to kind of improve it, and always like have incremental gains for everything that we make. But our typical products are like a front splitter, rear wing, side splitters, front wing end plates, and I'd say that's kind of our bread and butter of what we do.
Okay. How complicated? Like a front splitter is one of those things where most of us, we look at it and think, oh, that's really simple. It's a little tray that goes underneath the front of the car. And then you start getting into the details of the elements that go into like really making a front splitter work. And they seem to get really complicated really fast if you really want to kind of push the limits.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different ways that you can go about it. And you can have everything from as simple of a flat sheet of carbon, which even that in its sense, it's like typically a foam, high density foam core that's designed for composites with a couple of layers of carbon on top and below. And at that point, it's very easy to make, and we can make one for just about anyone. And then from there, we have a very universal front diffuser that we can bond in. So we cut it out, bond it in, and that's about as simple as it gets, and it works for most cars. In fact, that's what we use on our own car, because we wanted to show that you can still get a lot of performance with essentially the most basic form of a splitter. And then when you're getting into that really high end, you're trying to make a lot of downforce, you're absolutely right. There's like, you have a 3-dimensional tunnel design that you have in there with strakes, and it has to be designed exactly for the car. So we have a couple of those that we make, that we've made for a couple of different people. And then we have one that's a more universal application of that, where it has like large tunnels, and then we just add strakes where we think that they would be best placed, and give you that kind of more well-developed design in a somewhat universal application.
Okay. Wow. Man, that sounds like a lot of fun. And then you can put them on the cars, and then if you're doing the data capture and analysis, you can actually get out there and see firsthand how they all work, and kind of do you use that to refine your design, like actually use all the data that you're collecting to kind of decide like this is what's working or this is what we need to tweak?
Yeah, so on like a club level, like let's say what most time attack cars or club racing kind of builds would use. We can use shock pots, or essentially like a ride height sensor, and you'll use that to find a nice flat piece of road. And at that point, you can literally just measure how much downforce the car is producing. So you run it at like 60, 80, 100 miles per hour, and you can see what the ride height changes are. And then you do something as simple as like literally load a bunch of stuff in the trunk, have people stand on the splitter and see how much the car moves, and have a rough estimate of how much downforce you're producing. And then from there, you can start adding wing angle or adding or removing different front splitter end plates, like the size of those is a big effect on how much front downforce you make, and kind of find a way to balance it with that. So there's, CFD, which we use as well, but sometimes we found that the correlation between CFD and real world stuff isn't always the best. So we found like literally just taking the car out and testing it practically works the best and in a way that anyone can do it.
Sure. And then how challenging is it to, once you create these aerodynamic pieces and you're starting to create the downforce, how challenging is it to find a balance to get the car to handle the way that you want it to handle? Maybe you can have an easier time of making a lot of front downforce with the splitter, but then there's maybe more of a challenge in the back of getting the wing to match what the front splitter is doing. Do you find you have to balance them a lot?
So with most production-based cars, you run into the issue of you can almost never find enough front downforce. So you will do everything you can to get as much front downforce as you can, and then you want essentially the most efficient wing you can to balance it in the back. And your biggest adjustability is going to be in the wing, since you can just go from 0 to 12 degrees of angle of attack, right, and use that to balance it out. So most cars are like that. Our car is a little different in the sense that because of the layout and just the natural shape of the car, we actually have so much front downforce that we've maxed out our wing and we start taking end plates off and trying to almost shed front downforce.
Wow.
Yeah,
and this
which is rare for time attack car. And they recently changed the rules where we can run a massive wing in the back now. So if we were going to stay in street class, we would have just piled on more front downforce and get a custom rear wing. But since we knew we were leaving, it was that balance of resources.
Okay, and this is the NSX you're talking about.
Correct.
Okay.
So even the street class trim with no flat floor or diffuser, we're able to produce that much downforce.
Wow, very cool.
And so what made this decision to get out of street class?
We did kind of a little analysis of what it would cost to build a full out limited class car and what it would do to build a full out unlimited class car. And decided that, or I guess I should start to answer your actual question. We did everything we wanted to do in street class. So we had a couple of goals,
okay,
that, beat the records that we wanted to do. The big ones being Button Willow, Coda, and Road Atlanta. And we kind of made a decision that we were really hoping we could beat the Road Atlanta one, and that was going to be our final event, and got lucky and did. And so once we accomplished that, we're like, okay, we've done everything we want to do, and time to kind of just climb the ladder.
Okay. Well, let me maybe back up, because I think at the beginning you said when you set out to build that car, your target was street class. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so what your NSX is it?
It's a 91.
91. Did you just have it? Was this your race car? Did you seek it out to build it into this race car? Like how did the process start?
So it started with, I guess, my E36 M3 that I ran in the enthusiast class in both global and redline time attack. And we knew that was going to become a street class car. So wanted to kind of climb every rung of the ladder. Enthusiast, street, limited, unlimited was the plan at the very beginning when we started with that car. And when we started the street class build for that, it went to fab for a cage, and then we had an engine that was going to be put together for it. And like many project cars, it ended up everything took 10 times longer than we expected. And we were like, okay, we have this engine that the machine shop took a year to machine. And at that point, the budget wasn't big enough to just go get started the process all over again. The cage was taking a little bit longer than we had hoped, which really was mainly just because we didn't have an engine for us. We were like, don't rush situation. And then in that process, I'd actually set money aside to take the M3 to Japan. So that was okay, I really wanted to do that. It was just dream to take my own car to Tsukuba and visit tracks like that. And so I had this small chunk of money set aside, and it was pretty obvious that we weren't going to be taking the M3 to Japan since it was nowhere near finished.
Okay.
And the car was just sitting there, and I'd gotten dinner with a couple of friends, and one was talking about getting out of his NSX. So I kind of just decided I was going to put the money towards that, and was like, hey, if you're actually serious about selling it, I'll take it. And that happened. And I planned on keeping it, still progressing with the M3. We finally gotten the block done, and everything was, or the engine machining finished, and the cage was done, and all that fun stuff. So we were ready to go with the M3, or should I say the next step of the M3 was just getting it back together. And I took the NSX to one event and quickly realized that I really, really liked driving that car. And at that point made an assessment of the rules of like, okay, this is what street class allows. These are the two platforms that I have. Keep going with this one, or potentially go with this one. And just with the way street class rules are written, and with kind of the fact that that car gets in because of how low the performance is stock, it just made a lot of sense to go with that platform. And then I really just enjoyed driving it. So decided to abort that and go with the NSX.
Gotcha.
So where is this BMW now?
It's still sitting at my shop on a lift, still runs. You can fire it up. We're going to put it back together for probably an endurance style of build instead, since I still love that car. I'm a big fan of E36 M3s, so I want to get that thing back together eventually. And now that we have both shops, I think I have enough space to finally do it. So still exists.
Okay.
You dabble with that blue and white one that does like button wheel, the California stuff, or that
Yes.
V8 one?
You're talking about, the LSM3. So the Motorsport hardware car, I drive that car in Time Attack as well for all of the local events. It doesn't travel too much, but last year we were able to win GTA finals in both classes, which is pretty cool.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember that. That was like sick.
Yeah.
But when you were talking about M3, I was like, all right, so this is where it turns out. I was like, oh, this is a different car.
Totally different car. So still drive that one. The guys at Motorsport Hardware are amazing. They built a hell of a machine, and I was actually talking to them yesterday about some of the upgrades for that car. So fortunately, that thing's still healthy and moving along.
Cool.
Very cool. All right. Well, I have to ask, what grabbed you about the NSX? What was it in that first track that you're just like, this is the car, this is the platform?
So in doing a lot of the coaching, I've been fortunate enough to drive just about everything. And I found that, I really, really like mid-engine cars. And there's a certain way that some of them rotate, when you're off throttle. That's just built in the balance between a car that drives well and one that's not going to crash itself with 90% of drivers. And certain cars like the Lotus Elise and the NSX have that ability where you can really drive the car with the throttle, and it's really fun to drive. And even in a pretty much stock form, it did that. And whereas with a lot of like FR cars or your typical production-based cars, you're kind of always chasing understeer. Like the understeer, and you try to make it better, and you're trying to find ways to balance that out. It's almost like the exact opposite, where you have as much oversteer as you want, and then you kind of bring it back, and it makes a very fun driving experience.
Yeah, the NSX is a car that, so when we had the Acura franchise, we had one of the well-known NSX technicians. So we had a bunch of NSXs that came through. It was interesting just how that car sometimes just grabbed people, and it wasn't unusual to see people that would have a couple of them because they just got completely hooked on the chassis and down to the driving experience and how it kind of is a unique car to drive. But
Absolutely.
but
yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, to add to what you're saying, so I have this one. We have another shell that we're going to have for a crazy build, and my girlfriend also has an NSX. So we've all kind of fallen in love with the car.
Yeah, there's some interesting challenges with that platform, but there's so much good things going on with it that a lot of times it just grabs people.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
So in your NSX race car right now, that's a K24 in there?
We run a K20 in there. So we
K20, okay.
K24, but because of our gearing, the 2-liter works better for us at the moment.
Gotcha. And how much power is that thing making right now?
We kind of don't know, because when we put it on the dyno, we got a bunch of wheel spin, but we're guessing around 600 wheels.
Okay.
Wow. Well, and so that was kind of what I was going to ask is, you went away from the 6-cylinder, was it C30A?
Yes.
And that's one of the interesting things with that platform, a 91, so that's the 5-speed car, the 3-liter, but it's old enough that there's just not a lot of support for that car, and there's some people have done some kind of crazy things with that engine. But so how did you decide to go away from that engine versus trying to do something with the 6-cylinder?
Great question, and one that naturally we get a lot, because those engines are they're actually pretty great engines when you consider when they were developed. There are a lot of cars over there. There are a lot of cars in North America that make a significant amount of power, like 600, 700, 800 horsepower range. You look at FXMD, technically, one of the fastest time attack cars ever built in North America. And while they don't hold the North American record anymore at Buttonwillow, they ran that lap time, which is the 1:37 at Buttonwillow, pre the repave, which is a much slower track than it is now. And that's what's essentially a very fundamentally, or like very basic C30 build that's turbocharged. And I think it still had the 5-speed or the 6-speed stock, you know. So the capability is there, as we've seen. Then the question became, you know, the balance of replacement parts, cost, weight, and performance. So we know that the performance is there, but it was a very heavy package. Cost-wise, we could basically build 3 K series for the cost of 1 C series. And then replacement parts, like impossible to find parts for. Like you can't just go and buy another block if you blow it up.
Yeah.
Kind of situation. So we looked at the C series, we looked at the K series, and we looked at the J series. So the C series was out for the fact that it really didn't do well in 3 of those performance categories. The J series was a very good option, but it didn't have much of an aftermarket. And weight-wise, we knew for the power level we wanted, the K would make it and be much lighter. So that's why we ended up going with the K series.
Okay. Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, one of the most unfortunate things with those NSXs, especially the early ones, is just, yeah, like I said, there's like no parts available anymore. They discontinued the engines, they discontinued the cylinder heads. There's just nothing left out there. And yeah, so I mean, it's a tough call, but it makes sense.
Car to begin with, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like there's not a big used part market. I mean, and if there does, I'm sure it's hella expensive because of it.
Yeah, especially now.
Yeah,
for sure.
It was expensive then when we first started the build, and with how the prices of those cars have gone, it's gotten pretty much insane to the point where now I'm very, very glad I made that decision, because I think I saw a replacement engine or a used engine going for around 15,000-20,000 with the engine in France. So you're talking about, you know, I mean, we've broken a lot of engine and transmission components in our car, primarily transmission components, and we still aren't even up to what it would have been to build one and then replace one.
Right. Now, and on the transmission side, what did you decide to go with when you went with the K series? What is your transmission that you're using?
So we still run a K series transmission. We essentially took like the engine and driveline out of an RSX and just put it in the back. And at first we used, there were like a couple of gear set options. We had a friend that had a built transmission with a GearX gear set in there. And we quickly broke that and found that we broke a few transmissions while we were figuring out what we had to do. And fortunately, there was a pretty good option from a company called Samsonis that built rally gearboxes, and they were the only one that offered a 6-speed dog box, because most of the setups for K series are drag racing focused. So the top speed wasn't there. You know, they're designed for cars that are most likely going, they're only 4 speeds first off, and then they aren't really designed for cars that have need a tight gear ratio set and still get you up to like 160, 170 miles per hour. So Samsonis was the only option we had, and we just lucked out that they made it.
Oh yeah.
Pretty cool. Well, yeah, I mean, switching to the K series for the engine and the transmission, I'm sure that opened just, at least you had some possibilities there. So some things to choose from.
Yeah, that was massive. I mean, the aftermarket for the Honda K series is insane. Probably one of the biggest out there, short of domestic engines, but almost anything you want, you can find. And then there's multiple options. I mean, even sequential wise, now that we're moving there, we had the option of 3 different ones that are all, you know, 2 very high quality and 1 that's very affordable.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Now, and it's turbocharged, correct?
Correct. We run a Garrett turbo on there.
Was that the intent from the beginning, or did you contemplate doing like an NA build at any stage?
Just because of the fact that a big part of time attack is that it's a drag race with corners, we knew that we wanted a turbocharged engine.
Okay. So once you got the engine and the drivetrain in there and it's all working, and you go out there and you drive the car for the first time, did it still have the characteristics that drew you to that platform in the first place, or had it changed a lot once you'd put that much power behind it?
So when that all happened, we put the engine in, we dropped about an additional 300 pounds on top of the engine and transmission weight reduction. And we added a slightly larger aero package to it. So we had a lot of changes. And I was really nervous that it was going to drive completely different, and took it out on track for the first time, and it drove exactly the same. It was unreal. It was like you basically had the same car, you just dialed it up to 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Or like 13, actually.
Yeah, or 13. And that is a very scary thing. You know, we try and tell people all the time to make one change at a time and actually feel what you're doing. We tell people that because I've made the mistake of not doing that myself, and then been completely terrified to go out and drive the car the next time. Like, what have I done? And what did those do? And which one of those parts is actually making it handle like this? Yeah. So yeah, that's a scary thing. And you had to have been overjoyed when you got out there and it was just like, oh, it's perfect.
It was a very long process to get it perfect, but I was very thrilled when at least the dynamics of the car were there. The car handled amazing. Like, it drove really well. The power delivery was excellent. And then actually, one of the biggest things was I was nervous I'd hate the sound of it, because the C Series is known for being a good sounding V6, and ended up liking it even more than the C Series. So overall, we ended up just having a lot of positive outcomes with the engine with the car that were just fortunate. And to add a little bit to what you said about the whole adding or doing one thing at a time, I think for like 95% of builds, that's like 100% the best way to do it. Because you'll know, like, I mean, how many cars have you guys seen where you do 10 different things, then there's a problem, and you're like, oh crap, what caused the problem?
Yeah. Right. Especially in the handling department, you know, I mean, it's hard for people, especially amateurs like us, to kind of guess, like, all right, this is the spring rate, and you go with spring rate, shocks, front sway bars, rear sway bars, you bolt it all up and you put it all in there, and like, well, I don't know.
It kind of, sure.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many cars we've gotten in that were like, now it's common, you can buy all of these amazing control arms that are fully adjustable, but you can also adjust 8 different arms 8 different ways. And we've literally had cars come in where every arm was different side to side. Oh, yeah. And it's like, you have all of these adjustments now in cars that can make it better, and you can change all sorts of curves and do exactly what you want with it. But it's like, if you don't really know what you're doing, you're more likely to screw it up and make it better.
Oh yeah. I've seen that myself personally, where you can get, like, take a McPherson strut car, you can get like the same camber numbers different ways, and it's just going to have a different effect on caster, how the car gains camber and camber goes away, how toe changes under compression. It's crazy to me that people are out there getting their cars aligned and all this shit's getting all whacked out, you know?
Yeah, and like on paper, it looks like it's okay. Like,
it's like, oh yeah,
my static number is good. So but if you don't know what you don't know, it's very easy to get caught into that circle.
For sure.
Man. Well, and so, one of the inspirations to reach out to you is because we were out of COTA, and we spent most of our time in the pits, but you were out there just putting insanely fast lap times in that car down at COTA.
Thank you.
And then just kind of followed your progress through the rest of the year, and just like you basically dominated the street class in that car. But so, like, how much of a development process, once the car's running, it's on track, you're happy with at least the initial direction that you're going, how long did it take you to get to the point where basically the car was at the beginning of this year, to where you're happy with it and you're basically just way out there in front of the street class?
So the car was in a very good place at the end of not 21, but 20. So at the end of 2020, the car was in a really good spot. It basically had almost the same level of performance it has now. We just had a lot of little issues that we had to dial in. So we got the car in a performance window where we're like, okay, the car has the capability to do everything we want it to do. And then ran into a lot of reliability and all the teething issues that come once you have that dialed in, you know. So by the end of 2020, it had the pace, and we had all of the little issues sorted out. And then we had a really big string of bad luck that caught us out for most of 21, and then got all of that sorted out, and then fixed all of the little things that were like, okay, this could be better, but we didn't have time for it. From the end of 2020 to the end of 2021, which brought us to where we are now. And it was basically every event the car changed. I mean, even to the point of the only event where the car stayed somewhat the same from one event to the next was this year's COTA to Road Atlanta. But it's been like nonstop progression in in that time frame.
From chasing the trying to improve the reliability or trying to improve the speed?
Both. So naturally, it's like you're never trying, or you're always looking at what the competition is doing and what you can do yourself, and finding shortcomings in it in the car. And it was okay, so we know we're running into this issue with axles, let's say, right? So we worked with our axle partner to get that all sorted out, and then we broke 6 gear and we tore the transmission apart. I'm like, okay, so we know that we need 6 gears, and in order to fit it in the case, they had to V-cut the dog, so the dog had less meat on it. So then we found out, okay, we need to be easier on 6. So like the way like I shipped into 6, or how we deliver power in 6 had to be changed. So you found like a lot of those little things, while also being like, okay, we partnered with Spoon Sports and we got their front and rear bumper, which allowed us to have a much bigger aero package. It was like we have a fun gray area in the rules with the car where the NSX RGT basically had these bumpers, so it gives us massive overhang. So we're like, okay, we're going to improve the reliability. We think these are areas where we can improve the performance, and we were trying to do both together. And that kind of brought us to where we were at Button Willow last year.
Nice. And you had a pretty good showing at Long Beach too, right? Oh no, we had
a very rough showing at Long Beach, because the car was exactly where we're talking about now, essentially, minus the revised aero package with the spoon parts. And then we lost the engine on the outlap of the first session, which was very rough. And we knew like that track suited our car very well. So that one was a rough one. And that's when we were testing the K24, but we were asking a lot of it. And to be honest, we still have the failed engine, and we haven't completely gone over the parts. We don't know exactly what failed, but we think it was RPM related.
Yeah. So you're revving that thing to past 8,000, or?
Yeah, we go to about 8 to 85 in first through fifth, and to get to 170 miles per hour, we have to rev it to 9,006. So that thing in 6 gear is not happy. It's like maximum load. You have the aero load. You have, just the general stress on the engine of being at that speed for extended periods of time. We're actually bouncing it off the limiter at Coda and Road Atlanta.
That's insane, man.
Wow. Man.
We'll take it easy on first through fifth, but 6, all the beans. And it's going to have the thinner 6 gear. So,
so once we're in the gear, so it's like a very soft shift, have it ramp in a little bit more smoothly with the right foot. Then once your foot to the floor, it's just like, okay, this thing's, and it's so loud, you can't even tell when you're bouncing it off the limiter. So you almost realize it later when you're looking at the data in the video, because you're like, I don't want to pedal it too much. So you're pedaling a little bit, kind of bouncing it off, but it's I feel bad. I'm very grateful for Honda K Series reliability.
Yeah,
that's pretty rowdy, man. No joke.
Yeah, and pushing it that hard to that level. I mean, that's probably another great piece of making the decision to move to that platform, because you have a lot more support. There's a lot more K Series engines that are built to that power, so you've got probably a lot more like history to draw from, other people you can reach out to and find out like, hey, what works, what doesn't work, what do I have to look out for, versus playing with the NSX engine, which there's not that many of them to begin with, and there's not that many people that are pushing them to that level.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like with the C Series, running it at, let's say, 600 to 650 wheel, that's kind of a big deal. Like, not many people do that. But in the K Series world, if you call almost any K engine builder, they're like, oh, that's it, kind of situation. Right. Like, yeah, that's no problem. We have like 6 different formulas that will make that. Like, how high do you want to rev it? Where do you want the power band? Like, it's pretty amazing. I've definitely become a big fan of the K Series. Like, I've always been a fan of the engine. And then the more that I've kind of dove into it and started developing it on our car, like I'm in love with them. I think basically, if you want big power, kind of go LS or VR38. And then if you want small power, let's say under 800, K Series just makes the most sense.
Sure. I noticed you didn't say Subaru engine in that conversation.
I'm trying to be polite here.
If you're really striving to try and just burn through ringlands, then maybe you should consider a boxer motor.
Come on. No.
I will say, one thing that I absolutely love about the Subaru community is how diehard they are and how much they will try and develop. And you look at how developed those engines are compared to what it was when it was stock, to make 500, 600, 700 horsepower reliably. And it's incredible. I think the Subaru community is the only import community that's as diehard as the Honda community. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
I wish our engines were as advanced as the Honda engines were.
It's the one advantage we have, so we make the most of it.
There you go.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe someday they'll get there, but I think they're going to make the switch to electric before we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so Amir, let me ask you this too. So because you come at this from a driver's standpoint a lot as well, as you're trying to get this car to the track and get it to these events, I mean, was it you're trying to make the car faster, you're trying to make it more reliable. Was it a big priority, or let me ask it a different way. Was reliability a bigger priority because you needed to get in the car and get laps in the car to try and figure it out, or were you really just looking for extra pace?
So the reliability was more so just I would say I'm comfortable enough in the car that I can get out and within a small amount of laps, put a pretty representative lap down of what it will do. But what we found was so COTA last year was very rough for us because we had the pace to do very well there. But I went out and I was like, okay, I don't know this track that well. And this car is, it's a very difficult car to drive. So I'm going to do the track in thirds, and went out and did a lot of testing in basically sector 1, sector 2, sector 3, and went out the next morning, or by the end of day 1, we were pushing something like 1.5 gallons of coolant per lap. So the situation where it was like, and the amazing thing was,
damn pace series.
Yeah, then that was kind of a mix of issues, partially my fault, and I guess I'll explain that in a little bit. But the amazing thing about that engine was we pegged the temperature gauge at 270, I think it was, and we would do that. We did that the entire weekend, and the car still drove on and off the trailer, amazingly. But on day 2, we just ran into a couple of issues, and then it was part of the mistake was mine. But we the car is a treacherous car to drive. If you watched any of the videos of the in-car, it's kind of obvious how hard it is to drive and how snappy it is. And when it's on cold tires, it's it's very, very snappy to the point where if you're not paying attention, the car will it's gone. And I was out there kind of okay, I need to figure this out. Went out, going through the lap in my head while just swerving to warm up the tires. Got into a position where I was oh, I need to be over there. Turned in with no throttles. The car spun, and something as silly as because I didn't have a steering lock or steering spacers in the steering rack to stop the wheels from going too far, overextended to the chassis, broke the steering rack, and 2 ball joints. Kind of thing. So it's when I say reliability, it's not just things breaking, it's also development of being this is how a car should be designed. You're the steering wheel shouldn't, or you shouldn't be allowed to steer it too much kind of situation. So little things like that that I wanted, so that way when I'm finally ready, I can put together a lap without having to think about it. So the reliability was for that, in the sense of when I'm finally ready to put together a lap, I know I can do it when I need to. And Jackie, who has always been our biggest competitor, that Supra, it's a modern car with an amazing power plant and transmission. He's never worried about if it's going to break for the most part. You know what I mean? He went through some serious teething issues with that car. Once he figured it out, it's been bulletproof reliable. So we wanted to have as close to that level of reliability as we can.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah, because it's hard to win if you can't get around the track.
Exactly.
And I mean, when you have a driver like Jackie in a car that's that developed and that fast, you have to be there. The car has to be able to turn laps consistently so that you can actually put down the time.
Absolutely. So it was that situation where I know he's going to be able to get the most out of the car. I know he's going to be able to build up to it. He always does. He always goes faster and faster and faster situation. So we would get to the point where we'd be okay, we have our banker lap in, let's go do a flyer, and never get to that point because something would happen. So, and it's also, you're taking an engine and transmission and car that were designed for mid 200 horsepower and then turning everything significantly higher. So naturally everything is underbuilt in comparison to a car that's designed for 300, 400, 500 horsepower, and that's one thing we struggled with. And even to today we struggle with because of things like that 6th gear. In order to make it fit, you have to make a compromise. So in street class form, I don't think we'd ever really have what I would consider to be a bulletproof, run the first session to the last session, 100% every single component's going to make it. And that's also part of the motivation to go to unlimited.
That's also a time attack too, though. I think a lot of people get time attack and HPDEs confuse it. And I talk about that a lot in my drivers, not just my drivers meetings, but like on my one-on-ones, is like, it's a mindset, and it's a mindset that you go out on track to win on your first lap, maybe your second lap. But if you're out there doing it for 10, 15 laps, like, one, it's super cool that your car can do that, but two, that car is never going to be at that ragged edge if that's the expectation. So it's like a driver and a car, like, you got to really get there.
Yeah, definitely. Like, on a good weekend, if we run every session, we know that at most we're going to do, that's going to be, let's say, 4 sessions. That's going to be a total, like 8 hot laps at most. You're going to get the entire weekend, and often they're ruined by weather or traffic or other small things that get in the way. So you don't have much time to get it done.
Yep. 100%.
Well, and that brings me to an interesting question. So because you came at this from driving a lot of different cars and a lot of different disciplines, what made you want to compete in time attack? What was the draw for you to do that?
So, there are a lot of drivers that are either like, they like going to the racetrack and they like race cars. There are people that like show cars. There are people that like drag cars. I would say that I have a love for kind of everything, and taking inspiration from a lot of different things kind of led me to time attack cars, and seeing the cars in Japan back in the late 90s, early 2000s, had me fall in love with the cars more so than the driving, you could say. Like, at the time, I didn't even know that it didn't even make sense, or I didn't even realize that you only get 2-3 laps to make it happen. And in Japan, it's like you have a total of 2-3 laps almost the entire day. Like, they don't run anything like what we do. But I fell in love with the cars, and I guess you could say the driving style kind of came from that. Like, and my 2 passions are time attack and endurance racing. So it's like the 2 exact opposite things.
Yeah. Right. I know what you mean. I'm doing an endurance race in a couple of days.
Ooh, nice. It's so exciting.
Yeah, it's just lemons. But man, lemons and the Miata, I tell people, if you're getting the lemons to drive, don't drive anything other than a freaking Miata or a well-sorted BMW, because it's miserable in anything else, it seems like.
Yeah, you spend more time wrenching. But it's funny, like a lemons race or a Lucky Dog or Champ Car is some of the most fun you will have in a car. Yep. You can do it with like any of your buddies, which is cool.
Yep, for sure. 100%. Good driving. I'm going to get like 4 hours of driving in this weekend. And I think last weekend I got about, like you're saying, like about 9 or 10 laps. So it's a big difference.
Yeah. Well, so Amir, let's talk about the future then. So you're moving out of street class. Are you going to limited or unlimited?
So we talked a little bit about that and then backed out of that. So I kind of I try to be as analytical as I can with everything. Try to see what makes the most sense. And we realized that moving classes was going to be a pretty big jump in budget. But we done what we wanted to do, and then also, as much as I love driving, I also enjoyed building cars. So there was another step of like, okay, I want to try to do a bunch of different things and have a car where this thing was almost designed to show what we could do with our off-the-shelf products, now show what we can really do with the rest of our capabilities. So we started doing a cost analysis of what it would do to build both cars, essentially. Like, we took a car and we built a limited class car and an unlimited class car. What would it cost to build? And the cost for both were pretty high up there, but they weren't very different. So it was a situation where if we're going to spend this much, we might as well go for overall wins versus kind of climbing the ladder. And then on top of that, we knew we had a couple of builds that we were doing that were going to be in limited class anyway. And I already drive the LSM3 for Motorsport Hardware in limited class.
Okay.
So kind of going through all of that, it just made sense to go to unlimited. And then also playing with a lot of like or being around a lot of the cars I've been lately. They're like full on race cars built by manufacturers. And you see a lot of stuff that you're like, ooh, I want to try that. Or I want to kind of really have the freedom to do any of this. Mm-hmm. And that really pushed me towards unlimited.
Unlimited. And so now, having got to the point where you are with the car where it's making 600 horsepower reliably, how are you going to use that experience to hopefully make that transition to unlimited maybe a little bit smoother than what it was to get to where you are now? Like, what are some of the strategies you have for doing that build?
So I'm very glad we started in street class, because a lot of those, like the performance level that the car needs to be at is very, very high. And a lot of the mistakes or things that you learn get very, very expensive. You're having to do them multiple times, a season. And we learned a lot. And luckily the engine was low enough stress that we would never really, the only engine we ever lost was the K24. But we would be like, okay, we lost a gasket, we did this, we did that. How far can we push the stock sleeves? Like our current engine is rods, pistons, and cams in a stock sleeve and head gasket. So we found that, you know, we tried everything to see, okay, how soon can we go, or how soon can we push the engine with that? And we think if we do just either sleeve it or make it a closed deck block, we can take it to 800, 850 reliably. But we're focusing more on weight reduction and aerodynamics of the car to get the performance, so that way, if we need to turn it up to 800, 850, we can. But we know at 600, 650, the car's pretty reliable. Let's just bump it up a little bit, maybe get to the 650, 700 range, leave it there, because that's reliable, and then work around everything else and add the power last, which is kind of what we did now. When we started in street class, we started 424 horsepower and got all the way to where we are now, just about the 650 range. So we do the same, keep it where it is, and then move it later.
So what is your car in current trim? What does your car weigh?
2350 to 24, 25, depending on fuel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And
That's
then,
crazy.
And so your current plan is to basically reduce the weight. And how are you planning on doing that?
We have, like I've already gone through and basically made a spreadsheet of how much roughly we think we can take out of it. And kind of like we did the first time. So the car weighed 3,000 pounds stock. So to get it to 2,350 was a pretty big job. And we just kind of left no stone unturned in street class of things like, okay, spend 20 hours taking every ounce of sound deadening and everything out of the car. Okay, we did that. That was 16 pounds. We knew the K-series and the engine would save us probably a couple hundred pounds, like 200 to 300 pounds. Went through, and the rules say you have to have a carpet. They don't say it has to be an OEM carpet. So we went and basically got boat carpet that weighed 4 pounds or 5 pounds, put that in the car. You have to have a seat, but it doesn't have to be a stock seat. So we have that kind of like lightweight carbon seat that a lot of people do not like in the passenger seat. We basically just tore open the rule book and saw what can we do to get a pound, a couple pounds out of every system of the car. And we've done the same with unlimited class. We're like, okay, how much sheet metal do we have to have? What can we change doors wise? Now we can go to carbon doors. Like NSX doors weigh, with the glass in it, 138 pounds. So we're gonna go to carbon skins and save 20 pounds. You know, some things like that.
And you don't have that yet? You're down to 2,300 pounds with the stock doors?
Correct. So stock doors and glass.
Yeah, I've always, those cars are, I mean, can definitely get super light and trim. Ravi's car is pretty lightweight too. I just remember like looking at his TT4 sheet, like, or whatever class he was in, how light that car, like advertised lightness is like, man, that's crazy.
Yeah, so
that's nuts.
We have an ambitious target, but I think we can get pretty close to
And
it.
what's the target weight?
What's the target?
Let's just say a lot lighter.
Okay, all right. Fair enough.
Under 2,000?
One day, yes. So we have like we spread it into about 3 phases of like what it's going to cost per pound. And the first couple of phases aren't too bad. The third phase to hopefully one day get it to that gets pretty expensive. So it's like, you know, everything is about, like I said, we try to be pretty analytical. We know we're going to have X budget. We don't want to blow the whole budget, making it sub 2,000, but then we have nothing else.
But at the same time, I mean, it's like, you know, saving weight savings is the modification that makes everything better. It makes the car accelerates faster, it stops faster, it turns better. It
less
improves
tire wear,
everything.
less brake wear.
Yeah.
Less need for that much downforce. But I mean, at 650, you drop another 300 pounds. I mean, that power to weight ratio is insane.
That's insane.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's no secret that Ferris and Will Younger are the guys in the class. They're the guys that we want to beat, you know. And a car like Ferris, we know, I mean, just you're kind of silly if you think you're going to match his power level with the 4-cylinder. You know, just the amount of power you have to make per liter and per cylinder is like, okay, we're not going to do it that way.
And keep it reliable. Like that's
exactly. So it's like we know what the car's good at. We know what his car's good at. Rather than try to make our car as powerful as possible and maybe be very unreliable, like, okay, it's light, let's just make it crazy light. So, you know, we have a good platform aerodynamically. You know, like the reason why I can go 170 and bounce off limiter isn't because of we make 900 horsepower, because the car is small. So and our Aero package, we go for very efficient packages. So our philosophy on a lot of things are different from most people in time attack, you could say. So we're kind of taking what we're good at and just continuing to develop that as far as we can.
Man,
which I think is fun about seeing how far you've taken it in street class, because there's so many cars out there. And I was saying this in one of these Facebook groups the other day. So many people are celebrating lap times and but they're not celebrating good driving. When you can have like crazy fast lap times that are just faster than anything else out there in your street class, that says, I mean, a lot about the car and a lot about the driving. So it's exciting to be like, all right, this is a baseline. This isn't like a target. This is what we've done. This is the new expectation to build from here. Because if he hadn't gone out and run like these crazy times, then that would have never been, it would just been like, how much faster is he than Jackie now? Like now it's like, all right, Jackie's catching up. Jackie's back to catching up to you. And you're like, all right, sick. All right, cool. I'm going to go party over here with the big boys now. You know, it's a cool, I think it's a cool thing. I love it. So.
For sure.
I appreciate it. I think that rivalry, it's a very friendly rivalry. You know, like I talk to Jackie frequently, you know, we'll just share DMs and exchange, you know, say hello and see how each other's doing. So it's been cool because one thing we definitely agree on is that the rivalry has pushed both of us in our cars further than it would have been otherwise, you know. And
yeah, for sure.
And that's why I'm excited to take on guys like Ferris and Will, because they're, you know, just like Jackie was, they're super committed and they have some insane machines that it's almost, it's not necessarily that I'm like, oh, I want to beat those guys. You know, it's just, I want to see how far I can push myself, because they're both super nice dudes, you know, like you know, so it's not like anything, it's nothing more so than I want to see what I can do myself and try to push the limits of what I think a time attack car can do.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great philosophy.
A good close look at Ferris's car. I've never had like a really good, like, combed tooth look, but Will had his car in Colorado for the hill climb last year, and it was at one of our buddies' shop, and I really looked at this thing, and man, I feel like that nearly every, like, the attention to detail in Will's car is just on like a whole other planet, it feels like. So
it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see how the NSX and what you guys end up doing with it and stuff turns out, just because like that's a big target. It's a big target to aim for sure.
Absolutely. So that's also why we wanted to start in street and kind of like get at least a good baseline. So we know that if we're going to target those kinds of lap times, we have a good idea that we know that the car in its current form is at least quick. And it actually has quite, I mean, like we know the car has time left in it. You know, like part of what you were talking about earlier about how, because like from a driver's perspective, are we targeting reliability to get more laps, or, you know, that kind of thing? It's almost bad because from the driver's perspective, I'm like, okay, the car's not set up that as well as it could be. So I'll just drive around the problems. And we've done that a lot because the reliability was more so like the amount of time we would normally put into setting up the car to handle as well as it could. We just don't have the amount of laps that we can. We can't take it to like 10 test days and be like, okay, we're going to test this spring, this angle of attack, and do all that to get it where we normally would with like a typical road race car. So it was like, all right, I'll just drive around the problems, you know. And James Houghton and I were talking about that after Road Atlanta. He was like, he watched the video. He's like, man, like the lap was quick. It was like, imagine if it was just a little bit easier to drive. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Like and I'm not going back, oh no, I'll drive around any problem. It's just more so to get that lap time that I wanted. I knew we could probably do it, but if we had another year with the car to really develop it, it'd be even quicker.
Yeah. I'm sure it helps. Yeah. I don't know if you get that kind of partnerships or whatever, but I hope that partnerships and stuff for time attack cars is a growing thing, and it's an exciting thing for both businesses and the drivers. But when you have like a baseline of what you've been able to accomplish, it's not just some like random number. I mean, I meet people all the time who are like, oh, you know, blah, 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 I'm trying to build a car, blah, blah. I was like, man, like if you haven't even done it yet, you got like a long way to go still, you know, especially if you think you're going to be chomping at the bit with the big guys, you know. It's just, so I think that hopefully that works out in your guys' favor too, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, luckily we have some amazing partners that we've been with for a long time, you know, but I think that's part of the reason why I encourage everyone to start in enthusiast, because if you start there and you can kind of build a quick car, building those partners, just having results, just being at events and being there time after time helps you get those partners. And we have an amazing support system now. Like Koyorad's our title partner, and they've been incredible. Without them, we would be nowhere near where we are now. We've guys like Garrett, you know, their partners, KW, Titan 7, Yokohama Tire. I mean, like, so you look at all of the things that become incredibly cost prohibitive on a car, and we have partners for almost every single one of them. And it's from exactly like you're saying, you kind of build that up and start small and then build it up. And just by doing what you say you're going to do and showing up to events that you say you're going to, and not even like winning, but just like being there.
Yeah.
You know, they see that, you know, and we've been very fortunate, and it's fortunately growing.
Good.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Man, do you think, I want to just go back one step though. Do you think as you're developing a car that there's that trap of like you're in the driver's seat, you're driving the car, it's not quite there, you're not quite happy with it, but you want to still like do these other mods and just keep pushing the car to get faster? Is that kind of a trap that is easy to fall into?
It really is, you know, and it's one that I'm guilty of as well, where it's like, okay, we knew if we did, let's say we spent more time just dialing it in, there was time to be had there, but you're always like, oh no, we have to do this mod and we need to put on this turbo. Okay, we're going to change the manifold. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So, and then the problem with reliability mods is often whenever you go in for a reliability mod, it almost never stops there. Like it's the while you're in there kind of situation.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
So we've done a lot of that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, because by the same token, if you get obsessed with the car being perfect, it can be a trap on the other side of it too. Like all of a sudden, just like, oh well, I don't know why I don't know, we had an issue with our driver where there was this one corner at Pikes Peak that the brakes were having an issue, and like that became the focus of that whole race week. It was one corner out of 156. It was just like, and it ended up being okay. But I mean, if you get obsessed with the car being perfect, that can be a problem too.
Yeah.
There's a balance that has to be found there.
Kind of derails that.
Yeah, like no car will ever be perfect, because in order for it to do well in a certain corner, it's got to kind of give something up in another corner. And I think luckily, since I have a bit of a background in that, it's a setup where I'm like, okay, I know the car does really well in low speed corners. It can turn around and put power down really well. And rather than try to chase some of the high speed stuff, just like, okay, I'll drive around it a little bit, as long as we're making the other parts of the car better. And if we think the chunk of time we're getting from doing other things is bigger than chasing that, you know, like it's again, that analyzing the situation, be like, what's going to be the best overall way of going about it. And you're never going to be right every time, but if you're right most of the time, you typically do okay.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Amir, we're coming up a little over an hour here, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Definitely want to say thank you very much for setting aside the time to come on the podcast and chat with us. Really appreciate that. I have just one other thing I want, just to see if you could speak to this, especially since you do drivers coaching.
Okay.
So one of the things you'd mentioned about your car is that you know that it wasn't right and that you were driving around some of the issues. Mm-hmm. And that's something like, that's not an easy thing to do. It's not necessarily an easy thing to, as a driver, to recognize that there's this issue, but it's even another thing still to realize that there's things that you can do in the driver's seat to drive around issues like that, like handling issues or what have you. Where does that skill come from? How can you develop that skill? How do you work on that?
So I think part of that came from doing a lot of coaching and driving. I would hop into a lot of different cars and have to set up, you know, a baseline, or people would ask me, hey, how do we make this better? Or can you drive this? Or from the time attack background that I have, which has been from the beginning, we didn't have very many laps. So I'd hop into a car and I could either complain about what I didn't like in those 4 laps or adjust what I was doing in those 4 laps. And I kind of came to that understanding very early on, where it was, I could chase the perfect setup, you know, which in the right time and place is a good thing to do. Or I can kind of adjust what I'm doing to kind of get the most performance out of it that I possibly can, you know. So I drove as many different cars as I could. I would try to do different disciplines like autocross. I would try to do like skid pad stuff, and then I would do time attack, and I would do endurance racing and that kind of thing. And I'd try karting, you know, get into a kart every time I could, so that way I would just develop as big of a skill set as I could. And whenever I get into a car and it didn't, and let's say the fastest way to drive a kart is not the fastest way to drive a car. The fastest way to drive in an autocross isn't the fastest way to drive around a road course, you know? So we kind of try to figure out which balance of the different things I've learned may produce the fastest lap time. So it was a lot of it's just trying to drive as many different things as you can and as many different disciplines as you can. And that's how I developed it for myself.
Okay. That is very good advice for sure. for anybody out there, that especially as you're learning to driving on track more. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I get people who get in this mindset. They're like, oh, I'm not doing autocross. I just do track day stuff and blah, blah, blah. I was like, man, he's like, you might as well try and do everything. And autocross is cheap enough. You'll find stuff about your car that you really, really like, or find some dynamic of the car that you hate, and you learn some way to work around it and not get frustrated. Or another way I tried to reference it to, because I'm not a big autocrosser, but obviously autocrossing is accessible and relatively cheap. And I tell people, when I travel across the country, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 miles away, and you've autocrossed a bunch, yeah, my fastest lap from the first day might not be look exactly the same as my second day, but I pick stuff up, try to dissect that track so much faster, because that's what you're doing every time you do an autocross. It's new experience every single time. And just like that mental mindset, I mean, there's so much you get from all these different disciplines, just even like the old mental toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something like in time attack where you have to learn how to go fast kind of situation.
Okay.
Autocross teaches you that, because you don't get 10 tries at it, or you don't get 3 different days at it. It's like you have today and that's it. And you're competing against some other guys that are very good, and they're going to learn it right now.
Yeah.
So it forces you to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. We get that in California. We have button willow specialists, which is big things. It's like the North American standard. Like everyone in Southern California, they're all fast at button willow, and you take them like Willow Springs, and you can see that they're not used to going around corners at 140 miles per hour kind of situation. So I think exactly what you're talking about is it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, as we're winding down here, guys, Scotty, you've been quiet here a little bit. You got any last questions here for Amir?
Are we going to see you at Pikes Peak this year? You coming back?
I wish we were. Unfortunately, I don't think the team's coming back. And then with my schedule, I don't know if I can even find another team to work with. I think I have a couple conflicting events, so I will not be there, sadly. I wish I was.
Related to that, once you get your NSX sorted out in Unlimited, any thoughts about maybe bringing it to Pikes Peak?
If we finish everything that we want to do, we'd consider it. And if much like we accomplished our street class goals, okay, what's the next thing? Let's say if we do what we want to do in time attack, and we're like, what do we do next with the car? It's not out of the question. But there are a couple of other teams I work with that are considering going. So I'd probably more likely go with them beforehand versus the NSX going there. But it's a place I definitely want to drive. Like I originally had no desire to do it. I was like, oh, it's a cool thing. I always paid attention to who won. And then after being there last year, I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah, being on that mountain is a whole nother world, isn't it?
It's such a terrible and wonderful experience at the same time.
It's awesome.
I got a question for you. So this is kind of like a silly thing. When you lost your back window at Road Atlanta once, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys find another back window, or how did you guys ended up? Because there's no way, right? Did you guys go and retrieve it, or?
So I have to give a big shout out to Jason at GTA and all those guys over there, because we went to them and we were like, we need that back. Like, we have to have it back. Is it broken? And they said it's in one piece, but they also, the track management told them, you're not getting that back tonight. And we were like, oh, that's not going to work. So to the point where we literally took our pit bikes and we're trying to find it. Okay, whatever we have to do or con our way into getting it, we need that back. Got a call and Jason was like, hey, I made a couple calls. We got it back. It's in your pit area. Got super lucky and found a 4x8 sheet of Lexan at the local Home Depot that was 20 minutes away. Went there, picked it up, and made a new rear hatch by 4 o'clock, and we're good to go for the next day.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Very,
man.
very lucky. That was incredibly fortuitous that everything happened how it did.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh yeah.
Yeah, just for people at home listening or that might not know, so the NSX, your rear window is also like the engine cover, and it's a completely unique shape. And you're not just going to find one of those just lying around anywhere.
Correct. So, and I guess what kind of adds to it is that in order to meet the street class rules, we have to keep the glass that's behind the driver or in the engine compartment, between the engine compartment and the passenger compartment. So we had to design the cage in a way that basically just barely fit between the hatch and the rear glass. It was their way of saying okay, you have to keep the rear glass because it's part of the rules, But you can do these kinds of things. So we found a way to make it work, but it required us to cut the hatch structure, and the hatch essentially floats and is only mounted by the Lexan. And that's what happened was the Lexan failed. So we just put in like a lot more fasteners in it and got it to work.
That's awesome.
Fasteners, I love it. Hell yeah.
Very cool.
Cool, man.
Well,
thank you guys
Amir,
so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
Absolutely,
coming
man.
on. Thanks for making the time. Cannot wait to see how the unlimited build goes with the NSX, and I don't know, with a little bit of luck, hopefully we'll see you out there at Super Lap Battle next year.
I hope
Maybe
so.
even sooner.
Maybe sooner.
Yeah, it'd be great to see you guys even sooner, and then I'll keep you guys in the loop with what's going on with the car. It should be hopefully ready by GTA Finals in its first form.
Sick.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Thanks. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Thanks for your support, as always. And until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.